She heard her name and froze. Not called out, not shouted, whispered, from across the water, in a voice that was not supposed to know she was there at all. Chioma did not move. The torch in his hand was shaking, and for the first time since this had all begun, she understood she was no longer just risking her own future. She was standing in the middle of something far older than herself, something that had already cost one family a son and the other a husband. Nobody had told her that, not yet. All she knew in that moment, standing barefoot on a wet stone in the dark, was that the man beside her had gone completely still, and the man across the river was not supposed to know this place existed. This is where it started. Not with a wedding, not with a warning, with a girl who was never supposed to fall in love with that family, meeting a boy who was never supposed to find her here, and a third voice neither of them expected, calling her name like he already knew exactly what he'd find. If you've ever kept a secret you knew could destroy someone you love, stay with me, because what happens in the next few minutes is the reason this village still doesn't talk about that year out loud. 3 months earlier, none of this existed. Chioma was simply a girl who ground cassava beside her mother every morning, who laughed easily, who had never once crossed that river after dark. Then, one afternoon at the market, she noticed someone watching her. Not boldly, carefully, the way a person watches something they already know they shouldn't want. She didn't know his name yet. She only knew that 2 weeks later she found herself walking toward the river for no reason she could explain to herself, and that he was already there, waiting, as if some part of both of them had agreed to this before either had said a single word. His name was Emeka, and the moment she learned which family he belonged to, she should have turned around and never gone back. She didn't. For 3 months they met like this, quietly, carefully, beneath a sky thick with stars, certain that no one would ever find out. They were wrong, because the night the rain came down hard enough to turn the footpath to mud, and Emeka finally opened his mouth to tell her the truth their families had buried for 20 years, someone was already crossing that river toward them, someone who was never supposed to know this place existed. Emeka, the voice cut through the rain like a blade. Chioma turned, and the moment she saw who was standing there, she understood for the first time that this was never just a story about 2 young people falling in love. It was about to become something neither family could take back. His father had found them, and the look on his face was not simply anger, it was fear. The kind of fear that only comes from a man who has spent 20 years making sure his son would never stand exactly where he was right now. "Do you have any idea whose daughter you are holding?" Ize voice trembling. "I know exactly whose daughter she is," Emeka answered. "Then you know," Ize said, "what her father did to this family." Chioma stepped forward before she could stop herself. "Nobody has ever told me what my father did," she said. "Everyone simply expects me to carry the hatred without ever knowing where it came from." Ize looked at her for a long moment, the torchlight flickering across a face that suddenly looked far older than she remembered. "Then perhaps it is time someone finally told you," he said, quietly. He did not finish the sentence that night. Instead, he turned and walked back into the dark, leaving both of them standing in the rain with a promise that would not be kept for another 2 weeks. 2 weeks during which Chioma would learn that the land dispute everyone whispered about was never the real story.
Ize did not return the next day, or the day after that. For 2 weeks, silence settled over both compounds, the particular suffocating silence that exists right before something breaks completely. Chioma was forbidden from leaving the house after dark. Her mother, Mama Ngozi, watched her with an intensity that felt less like anger and more like fear. "Why won't you just tell me?" Chioma finally asked her, on the seventh night, while pounding yam in the dim kitchen light. Mama Ngozi's hands stilled over the mortar. "Because some truths," she said slowly, "are heavier than the people who carry them." "Then let me carry it too." Her mother said nothing, but 2 nights later, Chioma noticed something she had never seen before. Her mother, sitting alone in her room, the old wooden chest in the corner unlocked, a single folded letter resting in her lap, untouched. She had been staring at it for an hour. Chioma didn't ask what it was. Not yet. She didn't need to. Something about the way her mother held it, like it might still hurt her, even after all these years, told her this letter mattered more than anything either family had said out loud. If this story is pulling you already, take a moment to like and subscribe, because what's written in that letter is about to change how you see everyone in this story. It was Emeka who broke the silence first. He found Chioma near the market the following week, his face tighter than she had ever seen it. "My father finally told me everything." "Tell me." He hesitated. "Not here." That night, against every warning, she returned to the river. He was already there, sitting on the same flat stone where it all began, staring at the water like it owed him an explanation. 20 years ago, before either of us was born, my father and your mother were going to marry." Chioma went still. "She chose your father instead, and my father never forgave either of them for it." "That's not what I was told," Chioma said. "Everyone said it was about land." "The land dispute came later, after your father discovered the truth that my father never stopped loving your mother. He used his position with the elders to manufacture a boundary dispute that destroyed my family's standing in this village. Not because we stole anything, because he wanted to make sure my father could never come near her again." Chioma felt something cold settle in her chest. "You're telling me my father built a 20-year war out of jealousy?" "I'm telling you what my father told me," Emeka said quietly. "But there's something else, something he wouldn't fully explain." "What?" "He said your father wrote something down before he died, a confession, and that your mother has been hiding it ever since." Chioma's mind went immediately to the locked chest, the letter her mother had been holding 2 nights earlier, like it might still hurt her. She stood up so quickly Emeka reached for her arm. "Chioma!" "I have to see it. Tonight." She turned to run back toward the village, toward her mother's room, toward the truth that had been sitting 20 feet from her bed her entire life. She never made it that night, because when she reached the compound gate, breathless, her mother was already standing there waiting for her, the wooden chest open behind her, in a look on her face that told Chioma the truth was about to find her whether she was ready for it or not. "You already know," Mama Ngozi said quietly, "don't you?"
"I know enough," Chioma said, "to know you've been hiding something for 20 years. Her mother stepped aside from the doorway. "Then come inside," she said. "It's time you saw the rest." The room was dim, lit only by a single oil lamp. The chest sat open in the corner, its contents undisturbed for over 2 decades, old cloth, a faded wrapper, and beneath it all, a sealed letter addressed in handwriting Chioma recognized instantly, her father's. "He wrote this the week before he died," Mama Ngozi said. "He asked me to deliver it to Ise. I never did." "Why not?" "Because I was afraid of what it would undo." Chioma's hands trembled as she broke the seal. What she read confirmed everything Emeka had told her by the river, and revealed something even his father had not known. Her own father, Chief Obina, had confessed in his final days that the boundary dispute was never about land at all. He had manufactured it deliberately, using his influence with the village elders after discovering that Ise and Ngozi had once been promised to each other before he intervened. Consumed by jealousy and fear of losing her, he had quietly destroyed an innocent family's reputation to guarantee they could never come near his wife again. But the letter did not stop there. In the final paragraph, written in a hand that had clearly grown weaker by the time he finished it, Obina had left behind something Chioma had not expected at all. If you are reading this, then the silence has finally outlived its purpose. Tell Ise the land was never real. The only boundary that ever existed was the one I built out of fear of losing her. And, if by some mercy I do not deserve, our children ever find their way to each other despite what I have done, do not let this family repeat my mistake. Let them stay together. Let it undo what I never had the courage to undo myself. Chioma sat motionless, the letter trembling in her hands. 20 years of inherited hatred, built on nothing but a dying man's fear of losing the woman he loved. Does Ise know? Has he ever seen this? She finally asked. Her mother shook her head. I was too afraid. Then we have to show him, tonight. But before her mother could respond, a sound interrupted them. Urgent knocking at the compound gate, followed by a voice neither of them expected at this hour. It was Okafor, Ise's older brother, and the look on his face when Mama Ngozi opened the door told them both that something else, something they had not yet uncovered, was about to come to light. There's something you need to know, he said, breathless. Something my brother has never told anyone, not even his own son. He looked directly at Chioma. It isn't just about the land your father stole. It's about what happened the night your father died.
The room went silent. What are you talking about? Mama Ngozi asked, her voice suddenly unsteady. Okafor hesitated, glancing at the letter still trembling in Chioma's hands. Your husband didn't simply die of illness the way the village was told, Okafor said. My brother was there the night before. They argued. Eze went to confront him about everything, the land, the lies, all of it. I followed him because I was afraid of what he might do. Chioma felt her chest tighten. What happened? Nothing my brother is guilty of, Okafor said quickly. I swear it on everything I have. But your father collapsed during that argument. His heart, the healer said later. Eze tried to help him. I was there. I saw it. But Eze panicked, terrified no one would believe an innocent confrontation, terrified the village would accuse him of murder if anyone learned he had been there at all. So he left, and he made me promise never to speak of it. You let my mother believe my father simply fell ill? You let an entire village build a story around his death, never knowing the truth? I am not proud of the silence I kept, Okafor said, but I am done keeping it, especially now that I know what that letter says. Mama Ngozi sat down slowly, her hand pressed against her chest. 20 years of grief, built around a death that had never been fully explained. 20 years of a feud, built around a lie that was never truly about land at all. If this story is touching you already, take a moment to like and subscribe, because what happens next determines whether two families finally heal or destroy what's left of each other completely. Eze needs to hear all of this, Chioma said finally. Tonight, from us, not from rumors, not from fear. The truth, complete, exactly as it happened. They found him at his compound less than an hour later, Emeka standing beside him, neither expecting what was about to unfold. Mama Ngozi placed the letter in Eze's hands without a single word. He read it in silence, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something that looked almost like grief for a version of his life he had never been allowed to live. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet in a way none of them had ever seen. 20 years, he said quietly. I hated a man for stealing land from me, and the entire time he was only afraid of losing the woman I never stopped loving. He turned to his brother. And you knew all this time about that night. You knew, and you let me carry the guilt alone. I was protecting you, Okafor said. You were protecting a lie, Eze answered. The same kind of lie that has already cost this family 20 years it will never get back. He looked at Chioma and Emeka, standing together, hands intertwined despite everything unraveling around them. And for the first time since any of this began, Eze said something none of them expected to hear. I am done protecting a war that was never real. But as the words left his mouth, a sound rose from outside the compound, voices, many of them, approaching fast, carrying news that would force this private reckoning into something the entire village would soon be forced to witness. Someone outside had already heard everything, and by morning there would be no more silence left to hide behind.
By sunrise, the whole village knew. Word had spread the way it always does in small communities, not through announcement, but through the unstoppable current of whispers passing from compound to compound until there was nowhere left for the truth to hide. The elders called for a formal gathering beneath the old meeting tree, the very place where the false land ruling had been decided 20 years earlier. Everyone was required to attend, including Chioma and Emeka, who now stood at the center of a reckoning neither of them had ever intended to cause. Mama Ngozi stood on one side, Eze stood on the other, Okafor beside him, finally free of the secret he had carried alone for 2 decades. The letter was read aloud, in full, before the entire gathering. There was no way to soften what it revealed. A respected chief, driven by jealousy rather than principle, manufacturing a feud that cost 2 families 20 years of peace. And beneath that, a death surrounded by silence and fear rather than wrongdoing. The murmurs that swept through the crowd were not cruel. They were the sound of an entire village finally understanding a wound they had unknowingly inherited. When the elders turned to Eze and asked what resolution he sought, the village held its breath. For a long moment, he said nothing at all. Then he looked, not at the elders, not at Mama Ngozi, but at his son, standing beside Chioma, their hands quietly intertwined despite everything that had unfolded around them. I spent 20 years, as I said slowly, teaching my son to hate a family that never truly wronged him the way I believed. I will not spend whatever years I have left teaching him to inherit my mistakes as well. He turned to Mama Ngozi. Let the land belong to both families equally, the way it always should have. It was not forgiveness delivered at once. Some wounds take far longer than a single gathering to close. There were still difficult silences ahead for both families, still grief that would resurface in quiet moments for years to come. But that evening, as the crowd slowly dispersed and fires were lit across the village for the night, Chioma and Emeka walked to the river together, openly for the first time, without fear of torchlight or whispered warnings. They stood at the same flat stone where it had all begun. 2 years later, the entire village gathered beneath that same fig tree to watch them marry, Mama Ngozi on one side, Eze on the other, no longer enemies, simply 2 parents who had finally allowed their children to inherit something other than a war. What this story leaves behind is not simply a love that survived a feud. It is proof that the deepest wounds in our lives are rarely caused by the people who hate us. They are caused by the people who loved too fearfully to ever tell us the truth. So I'll leave you with this question. If a single secret, buried for 20 years, nearly destroyed 2 entire families forever, what secret do you think is still being protected in your own family right now,
waiting quietly for someone brave enough to finally ask. Don't just watch this and move on. Like this video, subscribe right now, because somewhere in your family's history there is a story exactly like this one, still waiting to be told. And the next time we sit down to tell one, you won't want to miss it.